Reason Podcast does not believe in curses or hexes and is unconcerned with what offends you. We do not believe that words have the power to compel spirits or demons to affect your life in any way. If you do, well, there is a reason why the explicit tag is there.
Listening to Reason Podcast. Reason. To think, understand, and form judgments by a process of logic.
Hello, and welcome to Reason. Today is Sunday, January 6th, and this episode is entitled New Year, Same Old Shit to Complain About. But fear not, we have a plan. We figure it's going to take about a year to fix the world. And that year begins now. I'm Joshua Billingsley, along with Paul Whitmire.
How you doing?
And this podcast is coming to you live from sunny Buffalo, New York. The Reason Podcast is a weekly discussion of events, current and historical, from a skeptical, rational, and non-theological perspective. The Reason Podcast is brought to you by the Offensive Atheists and the atheist community of Buffalo and Western New York. For further information, please visit our blog and website at wnyatheist.org or email us at reason@wnyatheist.org. Evidence for an association between KIBRA and late-onset Alzheimer's. Now, this is a memory show.
Yes, it is, as far as I'm aware or recall or remember.
Your best recollection is that it is a memory show. All right. We're doing memory, and one of the big things when it comes to memory isn't just increasing your memory or my memory. It's this somewhat small group of people who just lose their memory. And that's your Alzheimer's, your dementia, folks that have a medical condition, a brain condition that causes their memory to just go away. And the problem is, with your memory, very often large portions of your personality, your interactions, your life. So this is something which, is of great interest to a lot of people. So we found this article from the National Institute of Health, and it's a very good article, even if it's somewhat anticlimactic.
Well, a lot of the studies on memory, on the mind, as I do air quotes, and the brain in general, wind up being anticlimactic or inconclusive to kind of blow the ending for you there. Because in the end, you're going to say, which is pretty much how all these papers end, because we're still struggling to find out what the fuck is going on in our heads, and we may never know.
Right, but we're all the while ruling things out. So even when things are inconclusive, we know it's not absolutely true.
Right.
So we found out that something is at least not always or often true. And that's somewhat of the case here. But let me give a little bit of information. This is a collection of evidence for an association between the individual variation in the normal human episodic memory and a common variant of the KIBRA, that's KIBRA gene. It's all in caps, so you know it's special.
Mm-hmm.
There's the investigation of a possibility of an association between the KIBRA gene and Alzheimer's disease. And they use data from neurological gene expression, brain imaging studies, genetic association tests, in fact, a ton of other areas where the KIBRA gene is significantly overexpressed, and 3 of its 4 known binding partners are underexpressed, specifically in folks suffering from Alzheimer's disease.
Right.
Let's see. The areas specifically they focused on were the hippocampal, the posterior cingulate, and the temporal cortex regions. So they're looking at the areas that there's a lot of damage to, or that there's visible damage they can actually identify very easily with Alzheimer's.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we're going to talk about later as we get into our in-depth discussion of memory is that the posterior cingulate nucleus, the cortex, and the amygdala are the 3 places where Alzheimer's, at least the physical manifestation of Alzheimer's, first expresses itself, where they go, you have Alzheimer's.
Right. They can see the hole, and they can go, there's a problem right there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very easy to identify once you've gone through the tests. So what they did was they took brain samples from 3 Alzheimer's disease centers, and this is actually from individuals that were clinically classified as neurologically normal.
Okay.
So they got people to volunteer who were not suffering from Alzheimer's. They were neurologically normal as far as they could tell.
Wait, hang on. So they got people they physically took out part of their brain? Is that what you're saying? They took actual physical samples?
Well, actually, they did take physical samples, yes.
So people volunteered, yes.
These are people that part of what they did was they took folks that had other problems, and they were already in their brains.
Okay, well, I guess. Since you're poking around in there, you might as well cut a part of it out.
In this study, they actually went through 4 or 5 different techniques because it's hard to get a lot of data from people's brains because people don't like it when you go in their brains with like a little poker.
For the most part, yeah.
So a lot of this was done, as they said, some of it was brain scans. Some of it was done with actual physical evidence, actual studies that were done on brains.
Well, I hope they paid them at least.
Well, and some of it was done on people that had a long history of Alzheimer's in their family, but were suffering no apparent Alzheimer's, and they were getting on in years. So they have a lot of different samples, and it's not technically a meta-analysis, but this paper works functionally very much like a meta-analysis in that they've got a lot of different perspectives they're looking at to try and get some evidence of this.
Sure.
So
compound study.
Yeah, a compound study. Thank you. So one of the things they did was they took direct comparisons between brains of neurologically healthy and Alzheimer's disease affected brains. And they looked at the different regions I mentioned earlier to find out what the different gene expression was for the KIBRA, which, again, I apologize. They didn't put a lot of information here on what that is, but it's simply a part of the genetic code, which they can identify. It's simply something that the reason they chose this is it's one of the things they think leads to the development of memory in the way that humans have it in the womb, in vitro.
Okay.
And they're concerned as to whether or not this continues on throughout life. That's basically it. So that's why they're looking specifically at this gene. Now, they took samples and they found different amounts, and they compared them. Additionally to the physical samples, they took brain imaging. So they put a newspaper advertisement in to recruit cognitively normal volunteers from 47 to 68 years of age who reported a family history of probable Alzheimer's disease in at least one first-degree relative. I would be somebody that falls in this category.
I would not.
Yeah, see, there you go. My brain works so well it burns itself out.
Yeah,
yours just plods along.
It really does. It's like I have snowshoes in my head.
So in this particular instance, the subjects provided DNA samples just to show the gene expression, but not brain samples of any kind. Because again, the section of this that actually has the brain sampling is incredibly small. It's, to be perfectly honest, almost useless considering the size of the sample. They expressed a little bit of sadness. They couldn't get more people to just let them poke into their brains.
They couldn't get more people to volunteer to have their heads cut open.
No, they couldn't. You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
So most of this is dependent upon the brain imaging and then the DNA scans. But they compare them, and altogether in this particular section, they got 915 samples to examine, and they use some fairly severe criteria to exclude people. And after the exclusion process, they end up with 702 samples remaining for analysis. Now, if you're thinking about genetic expression, 702 samples is actually surprisingly small.
It really is.
It's not a lot of people. And so they make the comparison as to the expression of the gene in people that have one first-degree relative who is suffering from Alzheimer's and people that have none but are of the right age. And they go across the board. One of the things that they come up with is that this gene, while it seems to have a tremendous expression in vitro or in the womb, the expression of memory capacity and the portions of the brain that we mentioned earlier, it seems to have little or no effect on later aspects of it. So the parts of your brain that degrade due to Alzheimer's don't seem to degrade due to this gene, which is one of the few genes, they've only got a couple they found, that actually directly affect the building of the machinery you use for your brain. I mean, there are others that are out there, but these are the ones that they can identify. And again, first off, genetics is a clumsy fucking science.
Yeah.
No idea what they're doing. Second, the brain. We have no idea how it works.
Not a fucking
Put
clue.
these two things together, and you find, KIBRA is related to development of the memory sections of the
neonatal
brain.
development of the brain processes.
Well, specifically the sections of the brain that are used for memory. And so they're looking, and they go through 4 or 5 different things, again, with brain samples, with brain scans compared to DNA. They're looking for any ray of light that they can use to create drugs, because they could then use the information to create drugs for folks suffering from early stage Alzheimer's or people with a genetic predisposition toward Alzheimer's. Now, I guess I'll just jump to the end because we already threw a little bit of that in. There's not really any connection at all. What they did find was that the Alzheimer's is basically the same, or the KIBRA is basically the same in relation, in quantity or proportion, for people that were suffering Alzheimer's or had a history of Alzheimer's in their family, and people that were completely, let's say, untouched by Alzheimer's. Now, the vast majority of this paper is spent describing their mechanism, their technique, the exclusion process, how good their science is.
Right. Well, that's what you fill the paper with when you don't have a rock solid conclusion.
It's about 12 to 14 pages of them describing the sampling process in a very incredibly boring and almost painfully dry way. You see why these folks got into science and not into literature. But I'm going to read you one of the closing paragraphs.
Oh, yes, please do.
While the implicated KIBRA genotype was not associated with age at dementia onset, Brock stage, or neuritic plaque severity, it is important to note that the number of available subjects with available data for these analyses were relatively small, that age at dementia onset and semi-quantitative histopathological data provide relatively crude measurements with, in some cases, questionable inter-rater reliability, and that the histopathological measurements were performed on expired donors who were pre-selected in part on the basis of categorical distinctions in their histopathological severity. That was one sentence.
It's nice.
That was one paragraph. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines, and it basically means, hey, we can talk fancy and don't know shit.
Yeah.
We have found no connection whatsoever, and poor folks like myself who may at some point suffer Alzheimer's are in no better shape than they were before. To be perfectly honest, of the four different routes they looked to make any comparison whatsoever and to provide any level of understanding toward this, none of them panned out.
Right.
And it just goes back to tell us again that we seriously have no idea how the brain and brain disorders actually function.
Right. Well, I was actually able to after hearing it for the second time, I was able to tease out a little bit of information from that incredibly long, although not run-on sentence, which is impressive in and of itself.
Yeah. 7-line, non-run-on, it was pretty good.
But, to my understanding and the research I've done, here's what we do know. As far as Alzheimer's goes, 2 things happen. There is a plaque that forms on the dendrites, the tips of the nerve, and also the nerves retract from each other. So the synaptic gap
gets bigger.
The chemical messengers need to go across the synaptic gap. We're going to talk about that later, but that gets bigger, and also there's like a shower cap on the end of the thing. And why that happens, it sounds like, with this paper, they were, maybe KIBRA does that.
Or doesn't do that, for that matter.
Yeah. And they were, it seems like they discovered that it doesn't do that.
Well, the problem is they were unsure because they were looking at 2 different aspects. One if the high level or the high density of KIBRA would cause that to be more likely, or if a lack of it would make that less likely. And neither one of those avenues panned out.
Yeah.
It seems to be just buckshot. They don't have any additional information. But that does say that KIBRA, if it does play a part, it does not play a part in early onset.
Right.
And so, I mean, if you lived long enough, you'll probably get Alzheimer's. I mean, that's just the way it is. Your brain will just stop functioning.
Right.
But the early onset is people usually in their 60s. Mm-hmm. And they found that it doesn't directly impact that, what they call early onset Alzheimer's. Well, so there's no good data for that.
Well, as we mentioned before, studying brain physiology is a complete and total nightmare. And a lot of these research groups are forced to, like all research groups, they're forced to publish whether or not they actually have any useful or new information.
And they have to publish 15 pages or so.
Yeah.
Simply to justify the amount of money it took to do this massive study.
In all fairness to physiologists, we really understand how the kidney works. I'm just saying.
We really do. Well, the kidneys are surprisingly simple by comparison.
We got that whole kidney thing down. We got kidneys down. We have a rough understanding of hair follicles.
Hearts.
Yeah, we
got a pretty good idea of hearts.
Yeah. Brain is a quagmire.
It really is. We have absolutely no understanding. And that's just a preface to your later section where you discuss the how the brain functions.
Yeah, as
fact of the matter is, we don't know.
As best as I can, as best as our understanding of it is. And we know a fair amount. One of the things I'm going to get to as we get into that section is we know very specific details about a bunch of disparate pieces.
Well, it's usually because somebody got a pole shoved through their brain or a part of their brain cut out due to some primitive, very sad proto-lobotomy type experiments.
Yeah. Surgery with an ice pick is never a good idea. So,
well, it is for science.
Yes, for science. Okay.
Well, Bob now can smell colors. What part of the brain should you poke with that stick? That's how, that's basically how physiology works, but the brain's fairly complicated.
Pretty much. I mean, they didn't so much poke sticks in the kidneys, but,
They cut them out, looked at them, they checked them out, cut them in half. Oh, very interesting. We know a lot about kidneys.
Yeah. And the British make pies out of them, apparently, although not human ones.
No, I always thought they use human ones. There's human blood in blood pie, right?
I think so.
Blood pudding.
Yeah, blood pudding. I like pudding. I like vanilla pudding. I just think blood pudding, it just sounds like a bad idea.
Well, that's because you don't like blood. That's your problem right there. If you like to consume blood pudding would be just the dish for you.
That may be true.
You like pudding, you like blood, you put them together. Problem solved.
Yes, it's any two things that you like go together. I like Cheese Whiz and Cocoa Puffs.
Yes, and that's how the British come up with foods.
Yes, that seems about right. All right.
And that explains haggis.
I believe that's Scottish.
The Scottish are just like the English rednecks. Come on.
Well, they're the English in skirts, so.
Yes, that's true.
I'm sorry, kilts. But let's move on. Okay, so things we are doing this week, as Josh mentioned in his paper, and as we are going to elaborate on through the show, we are talking about memory. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about memory, have anything to say, give us a call. We are live. The number is 424-243-9589. There's also a chat room at blogtalkradio.com, which you can join us and, make disparaging comments as we fumble through this topic of memory here.
Because that's always appreciated.
And you can also always email us at reason@wnyatheist.org.
And those emails can be profane. We do accept photographs as well, so, anything that you want to send to us is absolutely fine. Insulting, degrading, we're fine with that. Just direct them all to Paul at Reason at...
That would be fine.
Yes.
I will just forward them on to you.
Thank you. That's awfully nice of you.
So, all right. So we're gonna step away from memory for a bit and talk about some current events that are going on. And the first thing up is an article that I have from usnews.com, and specifically a section of usnews.com called Washington Whispers.
Gotta love U.S. News. Gotta love it.
Yeah. So the article is entitled, First Member of Congress Describes Religion as None. So the new Congress was sworn in on the 3rd, and it's actually one of the most diverse...
I actually think it is the most diverse class.
Yeah, as far as I know, it's the most diverse, freshman class of congressmen that we've ever had in the history of the United States of America and Tripoli. So, so this new Congressman, Kyrsten Sinema, who was raised a Mormon, she declares herself, she declared her religion as none, which, I have some mixed emotions about this whole deal. I'm happy that we have people in Congress who are secular, are rationalists, are reasonable, are logical, and she actually, as I'll get to, she was presented with an award from the CFI, the Center for Inquiry, for the advancement of science and reason in public policy, which that's great. It's better than having a whack job, Christian in there who thinks that.
Right. Rick Santorum, for instance.
Right. Who thinks the earth is 6,000 years old or 4,000 years old or dinosaur bones are made of paper mache or whatever the fuck these batshit crazy people believe. Someday we're going to take Reason Podcast on the road and go down to that creation museum. That's going to be a good time. So, it's great that we have a secular congressman, but
yep, here it is.
And there's a but. She does not describe herself as atheist.
Well, actually, something just occurred to me. Can you read the title again?
First Member of Congress describes religion as none.
Atheism isn't a religion. She therefore would have no religion, so her religion would be none.
That's fine.
So it is accurate. I know where you're going.
Well, there's a little bit more
here.
An
atheist.
Well,
or she's not using the term.
It's a little bit worse than that, unfortunately, because she a representative from her campaign told the New York Times that Miss Sinema, quote, believes the terms non-theist, atheist, or non-believer are not befitting of her life's work or personal character. That's where I get pissed.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it goes back to the whole idea that atheists are bad, dirty, wrong, evil, and awful. That word is bad. To call yourself an atheist is bad. And I think that stems from a lack of understanding about what the word atheist means. And for all of you listening, we've mentioned it before. We talk about it on the website and on the blog. But seriously, it means absent a theology. It means that you do not practice a theological doctrine. And that is what the word atheist actually means.
Yep.
But it's taken by so many to mean this, well, you hate God and you want to burn all churches down with Molotov cocktails and you're a communist and, yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that you are in league with Satan.
So, yeah, and pretty much that's, and we are in league with Satan. He actually, is running the soundboard tonight because David skipped out because he has like a collapsed lung or something.
Yeah, so he claims.
Yeah.
So he claims.
Yeah.
I've known people with collapsed lungs, and let me tell you, very seldom do they have the opportunity to tell you they have a collapsed lung.
I had a collapsed lung. I could have done a radio show with a collapsed lung. I was fine.
Easily. You certainly could have run the sound and occasionally made a funny comment or something.
Sure.
I'm confident you would have.
That would have been fine.
But actually, specifically back to topic, I know that on the page, on the Facebook page, facebook.com/Reason Podcast, I put up a picture, what does the internet think? And I put it up for Reason, that 35.9% of the internet is somewhat indifferent to Reason.
Yes.
Only 35.7% is positive toward Reason, 28.4% is negative. But in the comments, one of the people who's liked the page put in that atheism has a 97.9% negative.
97.9.
Yes, and then I believe it was you, Paul, that looked up agnostic.
I did.
On the same thing and found that agnostic has an 84.1% positive.
Yes, it does.
And how much do you want to bet that 90% of those people believe that agnostic means you don't want to say one way or the other?
Yeah.
And atheism means there is no God, period. I am a non-believer and I have faith in that. And theist, of course, means believer, and agnostic is the middle ground.
Yeah, which is simply not the case, and we're gonna get into that in a bit. But just to kind of wrap up on this article, in addition to this Kirsten Sinema, who was raised a Mormon, by the way, which I thought was interesting. She now declares herself a religion nun. She's raised Mormon.
She may be spiritual.
She may have gotten sick of the underwear.
Yeah, that stuff does seem like it would chafe after a while.
Yeah.
Especially if you gained a lot of weight, lost a lot of weight. How many different kinds of magic underwear are you supposed to buy?
Yeah, I know. You just have to keep buying underwear after underwear. So, but in addition to her who's describing herself as nun, new members of Congress actually include the first Hindu member of Congress, which
sworn in on the Bhagavad
Gita.
Yeah,
which
I get that wrong every time.
The article actually had to state, sworn in on the Bhagavad Gita, a very holy book for the Hindu religion. It's like, really? Okay. So apparently we don't know what the Bhagavad Gita is.
That's the Hindu Bible.
Also, the first Buddhist to serve as a senator. So we got a Buddhist, we got a Hindu. Buddhist, I'm a little sketchy on. Hindu, the Hindu religion is like a salad bar, so I don't really care. I mean, they're like, oh, you got gods? We'll take your gods too.
Well, the Hindus are less likely when dealing with other religions to say you people are all burning in hell.
Yeah.
So the monothéistics are really big on burning in hell.
They did have that whole caste system thing going on for a long time.
They still do-ish, kind of. No, yes, no, yeah, we do. So it's still sort of going on out there.
Well, basically in India at this point, it seems to be, oh, we don't have a caste system. Get back in the fucking sewer! We don't have a caste system.
That's about right. That sounds about right.
So that's, which I guess is better than we have a caste system, get back in the fucking sewer. So sure. But yeah, I mean, this is, again, it's the most diverse Congress to ever come along. And the article makes some assumptions, saying apparently a growing number of Americans are running away from organized religion, but by no means running away from God. The nuns are the undecided of the religious world. And, I have a problem with the term nuns. It seems to be, nuns is nothing more than when they decided to remove the X rating on dirty movies and call it NC-17. You're just slapping another name on there.
Well, no, because again, I don't think those people ever, like the NC-17s used to be rated X, but those people were never atheists. They happened to practice no theism.
So they're absent of theology? So they're atheists?
They weren't atheists. The terminology was never that. It's not like they went from being atheists to being nuns. I think that taking the word, which is so tainted and soiled, out of the equation allows them to then act on their atheism and be a little more vocal about it.
Yeah.
So,
well,
it's propaganda and it's censorship, but at least now we have some nuns when we didn't have any before. And N-O-N-E, not N-U-N, for anybody out there that wasn't paying a whole lot of attention.
So they don't wear the habits and the big...
The atheists, no. No, they don't. Although we should get some funny hats. Gotta tell you. If we had some funny hats, people would donate money.
It's true. I went out and bought all those nun habits. I don't know what I'm going to do with them now.
Habitually, people wear them.
That's true. I'm sure I could wear them for various weddings and formal events.
Well, you are an ordained minister.
Yes, I am.
As am I.
Which is why I should wear a nun habit or a nun costume to weddings, gun shows, like RV shows. I bet you it'd be a big hit.
Oh, I would think so. RV shows, RV/gun shows, where they sell RVs and guns.
And gun racks that fit in the RVs.
Yeah, so that'd be fantastic. You should definitely do that. And actually, if you've got a spare one, I'd go with you. It'd be a good time.
Good deal. So that is the first member of Congress describes religion as none, N-O-N-E, which... in the end, yes, it's progress. So I guess we got to say, yay, it's progress.
It's still a slap in the face to people that understand language.
Yeah.
But
and
what you gonna do?
We're gonna go down that road. We're gonna fuck up the language anyway. So it's gonna happen. So moving on, I know Josh, you have something about Montana apparently.
Yes, from the National Center for Science Education, an article called "Montana Bill Mutates." Apparently, in Montana, they put up a bill requiring schools to teach intelligent design along with evolution. So that's so far so bad. But instead, now the bill purports to, quote, encourage critical thinking regarding controversial scientific theories. Yes, promoting intelligent design is encouraging critical thinking regarding controversial scientific theories.
Wait a minute. So this is an article about how they changed a bill to better reflect intelligent design. And the article is entitled Montana Bill Mutates. Mutations being the hallmark of, what was that word? The thing that Darwin came up with?
Evolution.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Montana.
And I actually think that since this is from the National Center for Science Education, I think that to some degree this is written a little tongue-in-cheek. And I think that's
maybe so
done. The title is just for fun. But the draft bill now produced in response to the requests contains a preamble, the requests being that it would then encourage critical thinking regarding controversial theories. In response to those requests, it contains a preamble which invokes academic freedom, the lack of scientific agreement, and critical thinking in support of the bill's provisions and 5 sections, of which the first is the most substantive, the first being intelligent design. Mm-hmm. The draft bill provides that it may not be construed to promote religious or non-religious doctrine, but it is silent as to whether intelligent design constitutes a religious doctrine. So it says that it's not promoting a religious doctrine, promotes a religious doctrine, and then does not label it a religious doctrine.
Well, that's kind of standard fare for the whole.
But it's absolutely hilarious that their bill to say that they have to teach intelligent design is to promote to encourage critical thinking regarding controversial scientific theories.
It makes me wonder if they have any idea what critical thinking is.
I'm really sure that they don't. I'm pretty sure they believe it's that fair and balanced stuff they have on Fox News. That's critical thinking.
Well, you need to give each side of the argument equal time to present their position.
And I fall back on it. I believe that is true, which is why the stork theory of reproduction and alchemy. You went to school for chemistry. How much alchemy did they teach you?
50%. It was 50% chemistry, 50% alchemy.
Present both sides of the argument. Let the student decide.
Right.
And when it comes to, 8th grade or 9th grade biology, those folks are very well suited to make an educated and rational decision between everything every one of the people that they find divine, holy, and respectable has promoted and some evil thing that some weird bearded guy has put forth to deny the existence of God.
Right.
Yeah, so they can weigh those two options pretty evenly.
Especially when they're presented by an authoritative figure in a science class.
Yes, I mean, put it in science class, it's got to be true. Everybody knows that.
And again, I don't have any problem with intelligent design or creationism or whatnot being taught in a philosophy class or religious studies class.
Yeah.
Go nuts.
Fun ideas. You can play with these ideas in philosophy and religious studies. It certainly is relevant. Science, though? Not so much.
Well, time and time again, if you listen to all of the leading figures on the theist side of the argument, whether they're in giving speeches or in debates or anything like that, they talk about how atheists are obsessed with a physical showing of the evidence, and that's where atheists go off course, because God, of course, and the creation of the universe is metaphysical.
Right, beyond physics.
Right, which they're basically arguing from the position of saying that your scientific tools cannot and should not be able to detect this meta or above physical property that exists within the universe, that created the universe, or exists outside of the universe, outside of space and time, whatever you want to believe.
So your scientific tools are inadequate.
Right, and we should teach that in science class.
Right, that makes perfect sense. You're right. Actually, if they did teach it in philosophy class, philosophy does have huge sections, huge swaths. Large portions of it, I think, is gibberish. That's neither here nor there. Huge swaths devoted to metaphysics.
Sure.
And so if you can construct a metaphysical argument for intelligent design, then that's fine. You can present that in a philosophy class, but if you can't construct a logical argument for it, and you can't use any of the tools for science, it's stuck in theology.
It really is.
It can't enter any other area of study.
And you really can't have it both ways. You can't say that your scientific tools are not the appropriate tools to test this hypothesis due to its metaphysical nature, and also say that this is grounded in science and we should teach it in science class.
Right.
What science is it grounded in? Well, it's metaphysical, so it's not really grounded in science, but it's science. It's not science, but it's science.
Yeah, you can't have the fluffiest of fluffy philosophical areas present in science class.
Yeah.
It's the worst of the worst when it comes to philosophy. And I mean, and I hate to say that as a philosophy graduate, but, you know, it's the worst of the worst in philosophy where the fluffiest, craziest, batshit notions are presented. You can't present that in science class.
Right.
And
especially not to middle school, high school, and even, you know, beginning college level students. As someone who has taught middle school, high school, and college students for over 10 years, one thing as you're teaching is abundantly clear. They are developing, and I'm not disparaging high school students or anything like that, but they are developing. They are in the process of developing their critical thinking skills. And they develop those skills based upon the information that's presented to them and based upon how that information is presented and from whom it is presented.
especially considering that we don't actually teach critical thinking skills.
No, we don't.
In elementary, middle, or high school. If you want any critical thinking skills to be actively taught, at best you're going to go with college, and you could probably get around having any of those in college as well.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
I think the closest I came to any sort of critical thinking education in my undergraduate college was the library studies course I had to take.
Actually, that was, research would be a better name for that class, and research skills do involve, you're right, some critical thinking, but, a lot of research is just bullshit. It's cherry picking ideas, putting them together in your own way, and, getting it in on time. There's
Yeah.
not a lot of thinking involved for most students.
No, there really isn't. And did you take that library studies course?
No, I took critical thinking, language, and logic. That was the first critical thinking class I took.
Maybe it was just science, but everyone had to take this 2/3 of a semester long library studies research course online.
Online?
Online.
They didn't even have a real class?
No.
Such a low opinion of, oh my God. Okay, well, what you gonna do?
And it was like this hurdle for so many people to graduate. They're like, oh, I got to take that stupid library studies online course thing. So yeah, I mean that was my entire experience with learning critical thinking in college. But yeah, I mean ultimately my point is that when students are developing those critical thinking skills, they're developing those skills based upon the input that they're given.
Yep.
So, which is why it's not necessarily a good idea to take something like a science classroom, which should, and I've seen so many classrooms that don't, but should function on the premise of everything within that curriculum should be able to have the scientific method applied to it.
Well, that's what science is everything which falls under the purview of the scientific method.
Right.
That's it.
And then throw something in there which states on the surface, this is metaphysical, the scientific method doesn't apply. And bring that into the science classroom is something that is going to simply make things more difficult for students in the future.
And it's also written by people that don't understand what science is. They're these people that don't understand what science is. So they say, well, teach the opposing viewpoint. No. It's not about viewpoints. It's about testing.
Yeah.
Can you test? Is it testable? Because if it's testable, now we can talk about it in a scientific arena. If it's not testable, then maybe you leave it to philosophy and we can construct different perspectives. But if it's something like something metaphysical, beyond metaphysical, theological, you've got nothing. I'm sorry, I don't even think you should teach it in a theology class. Because
perhaps not.
Maybe the history of I was going to say creationism again, intelligent design. Maybe the history of intelligent design as a theory, but that's about the best I'd go for.
Yeah. But it's Montana. So, sorry anyone listening in Montana.
Big sky, Montana.
It does have a really big sky.
Bigger sky than most places.
Yeah. I drove there and I went, wow, the sky is big.
See, they don't bullshit you there.
No.
And they'll tell you some bad science, but they don't bullshit you about the sky. That they understand.
That's the one thing.
That's where God lives.
One thing they have covered is the sky. Biology, look at the sky.
It's huge. Yeah.
All right. So that was Montana Bill mutates.
Mm-hmm. Now, moving on, Paul, you and I were, and anybody that actually follows us may be familiar with the topic, but Paul, you had something, let's say a bee in your bonnet recently.
I did, actually, so much that I had to cough there. So I'm going to talk about, I'm going to kind of paraphrase and go through what was a recent blog post that I put on our blog, The Offensive Atheists, and you should check that out at blog@wnyatheist.org. But I'm going to talk about this, and it goes back to the issue I was talking about with my news article. The post was entitled, "I Don't Want to Be an Atheist." And the reason why I titled this article in this particular way is not because of the definition of atheism that is the actual linguistically correct definition, being, again, absent a theology, but instead the fact that atheists are considered to be this weird collection of people who hate God, sinners, blasphemers, communist pimps, prostitutes, sodomites, Satan worshippers. Where all of this, if you just spend 5 minutes on YouTube just watching various religious folk in their comments about atheists, and it's a little disheartening. It's a little disheartening to me to know that I am a member of a group that lots of people throughout the history of the world, throughout the history of America, have been oppressed and have had things be much shittier for them than I have in my life. My life is relatively good. I'm not a slave. I didn't have my land stolen from me because of plastic beads. I didn't have my entire culture and way of life just completely decimated in the name of manifest destiny. And then have to have my holy mountains have the faces of the 5 presidents who actually stole my land and killed all my people, carved into my holy site in North Dakota. Yeah. So, again, we atheists don't necessarily have it that bad. But that being said, we are so hated. And it's the thing about it is it's a hate that is completely and totally socially acceptable. As Josh was saying, 97.1 or whatever it was % of the internet web pages that are out there that reference the word atheist or atheism do so in a negative light. And that's perfectly fine. There's plenty of websites out there supporting the Ku Klux Klan, but probably not as many out there as there are out there disparaging atheism. We are a hated and misunderstood group. And it's partially our fault, is what I have to say about that. We are the God-hating sinners and sodomites, and we have this other secondary problem with atheism in our collective. We are snobby, we are elitists, and we are intellectuals. And that's used in a negative sense, intellectual, snooty intellectuals. And we propagate that idea. I mean, when you watch Fox News and you see David Silverman from American Atheists go on there, or any other atheist that get, or any representative from American Atheists, we do tend to come across as snobby, as intellectually superior in a bad way when you're dealing with someone like Bill O'Reilly, who, you're intellectually superior. That's, tide goes in, tide goes out. That's all I need to know, because that's the thing. So we kind of substantiate that in ourselves, and we do so as well with the various debates we have. Christopher Hitchens has passed, unfortunately, but when Christopher Hitchens debate, one of the things that was most enjoyable about watching a Hitchens debate was watching him just, sit back, let Dinesh D'Souza or Deepak Chopra or whoever just go on and talk and just dig themselves into a hole, and then Christopher Hitchens would pop out with that just one comment that would, just completely decimate the entire argument, which was great for us. It was entertaining, and it was great for those of ostensibly us out there in the audience who aren't necessarily familiar with the fact that there are a collective of people who think that the way they do and could actually be a group that they could subscribe to, participate in, and actually have a collection of like-minded people. And that's great. We're building our base. We're making ourselves stronger, and that's wonderful. But eventually we're going to have to turn towards those who are not the hidden atheists out there in the crowd, but rather the theists out there in the crowd. The agnostics, as it were, i.e. the people who don't know what that word means. And we're going to have to try and convince them to be on our side. And we're never going to get anywhere. We're never going to get beyond 12% of the population being nuns and 1% of the population, if that, being atheists or being out atheists, being declared atheists. We're never going to be a force for change in this society or in the world in general until we can convince the theists out there that we are not the devil, that we may hold different positions than they do, but we hold them for this reason, and this reason, and our reasons are logical, and you should, much as you would for a religion that you don't subscribe to, you should respect our beliefs, much like a Christian would respect the beliefs of a Catholic, a Hindu, a Buddhist, and certainly not a Muslim, but that's an entire different story. So atheists are this group that is just set aside and ignored and considered to be evil and wrong and bad, and also they're not actually taking the time to find out who we are, why we believe the things that we do, and so on and so forth. And so, ultimately, it's going to come down to us making a difference. We need to be participating in trying to change the public perception of what atheism is. We need to, first off, establish what that word means, because apparently nobody knows what that fucking word means, and that's the worst thing. Agnosticism versus Gnosticism is a matter of having knowledge versus not having knowledge. Gnosticism being knowledge, agnostic, agnostic, meaning that you don't have knowledge. That's on a different spectrum from theist versus atheist. That's just one distinction that needs to be made, that people need to understand, so that they can stop thinking that we're communist Nazis intent on burning down churches and worshiping Satan and, killing babies and putting them on spikes and whatever it is that they believe that we do. And again, this is not necessarily our fault. I mean, it's a little bit our fault because we are kind of snobby, elitist assholes. We try, though. But ultimately, we're going to have to convince the world that we are not the devil. And that's going to take a little bit of change in the way that we approach dealing with the religious and basically the religious, yes, but also kind of the people floating in the middle, people who I grew up with and who I'm still friends with now, those who are not religious at all. They're not atheists. No, I'm not an atheist. Do you practice any sort of religion whatsoever? I went to church when I was a kid, but I'm not atheist. And that just serves to put atheism, which is in and of itself a very rational position of being absent of theology, into a box that says that we are bad and evil and wrong. That's not our fault, but we need to change that perception. I mean, there's groups out there working towards changing that perception. I think the National Atheist Party is trying. I think they have a long way to go, but at least they are a group out there who's trying to participate in the game and do something, as opposed to sitting on the sidelines and throwing darts into the game, which is, truth be told, when you're talking about a debate, whether it's Dawkins or the past debates with Christopher Hitchens or Daniel Dennett or Sam Harris, any of these people, it's all a matter of cheerleading for our side and attacking the other side, and it ultimately, the unfortunate thing about those sort of events is that I don't think anyone walks away from those events having had their position changed. And that is what I think we need to work on as we move into this next year, as we move into dealing with the rest of the 2000s, all through this century. We're going to have to, if we ever want society to function on a rational and logical basis, then we're going to have to somehow convince those who hold beliefs different from ours that we are not necessarily the devil for holding the beliefs that we hold. And that ultimately is my position on atheism and where I hope we can go in the future. So when I say that I don't want to be an atheist, what I mean is I don't want that the stigma of atheism to continue to exist. I will always be an atheist. I'm not going to ever have a theology. I'm certainly not going to go to church on Sunday or keep holy the Sabbath. We do the radio show on Sunday, so that's going to make things more difficult to, not use any electronics or anything like that, or whatever the fuck you're supposed to do on the Sabbath. I don't know. I don't think you're supposed to turn on the stove. I get hungry. So that'll be a problem. But atheism as a label, eventually, if we all think rationally and logically and we move away from the demons that have haunted our world, our fears about death and thunderclouds and lightning bolts and all of the things that caused us to develop a framework to explain these unexplainable physical phenomena that exist in the universe, if we can move into a position where we all realize why we came up with the answers we came up with and modify those answers based upon the new information that we collect, then atheism will be a thing of the past. We don't necessarily need to have that label if everyone is a skeptic, is a rational thinker, is a critical thinker, and evaluates the world around them given the tools that we have to do so. But until that happens, I'm stuck with the label, and that's fine. I will pick up that flag and carry it. I will continue to declare that I am absolutely 100% an atheist, and will continue to be so until that word doesn't need to be the label that it is now. So I don't want to be an atheist, but I have to be. And that's my position on that.
All right. Well, I know you said that you were never going to accept any theology, but I don't know. That Scientology looks pretty good to me. It's got science right in the name.
I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no religious body seeks to impose its will, directly or indirectly, upon the general populace.
Let's restore respect for America's secular roots. Help the Freedom From Religion Foundation defend the wall of separation between state and church. Join us at ffrf.org. Freedom depends on freethinkers.
Do you have questions, comments, concerns, or random musings? Email us at reason@wnyatheist.org. Out of boredom, you should check us out on Twitter and follow @Reason Podcast. We appreciate it when folks retweet us because it makes us feel smart and important. Listen live Sundays at 8 p.m. Eastern on blogtalkradio.com. Call in, join the conversation at 424-243-9589. Can't listen live on Sundays because you're too busy praying to whatever gods you believe in? We are also on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and you can download the show from wnyatheist.org/reason.php. Find us on Facebook at Reason Podcast and go ahead and like us. We'll take your liking us as loving us, and that will sufficiently satisfy our egos. We know you're out there, we know you're listening, and we appreciate it more than these words can say.
All right, fantastic. Now, Paul, I know you and I have discussed this in some detail, and we've gone over this, but maybe once and for all, right now, considering the vast quantity of knowledge we have about the human brain, what's memory?
Okay. Well, there's when dealing with the topic of memory, as we came up with this idea to do a show on memory, there's a couple of different ways you can go. You can talk about the psychology of memory, the psychological framework of, our best understanding through psychological studies and, psychology stuff like surveys and talking to people and blah, blah, blah. And that's one way to go. I chose to actually steer us in a completely different direction here, and I'm going to do a completely physiological discussion of our best understanding about how the brain stores, retrieves, and organizes memory. So that being said, let's kind of dig into this, and we're gonna start off really small, and there's a little bit of heavy science coming our way, heavy physiology coming our way, but we're gonna work our way through it, and hopefully it will be comprehensible to people listening. Even though I don't have a whiteboard that anyone can see, I'm writing on one now, but you can't see it.
Definitely. I can hear the squeaking of the marker.
Yes, it's always an enjoyable sound. So, memory is a function of the brain. And like most everything that happens with the brain, we have a pretty decent understanding of how the various parts work, as I was saying earlier, but we have no fucking clue about how it all fits together to make a functioning machine. That's the problem with the brain, and it's actually a problem that's specific to the brain. We're much better, as we were talking about before, about any other organ in the body besides the brain. Mm-hmm. The brain is kind of a mystery to us. Part of the problem with that is that it's a big goop of jelly, and
stuff is happening.
Yeah.
We can see stuff happening, and then eventually figure out kind of, sort of what's happening.
Right. So, we have no clue how it all fits together to make a functioning machine, and ultimately, in the end, that's what our brains are. They're machines. They're machines, and of course, they're storehouses of the soul and our eternal salvation and all that as well.
Oh, of course. Don't forget those. That's very
But
important.
also machine.
Mm-hmm.
So,
like in the Matrix.
We've talked about brains before. Tonight we're going to start from the most basic components and try and build a framework, a best fit according to our understanding, for the physiological processes that occur as we encode, store, and retrieve memories. Basically that's a memory in total. If you can get it in there, keep it in there, and then recall it, then you actually remember. So the brain is nothing more than a huge bundle of neural cells, supported by support cells called glial cells, and they basically hold up the architecture of the brain. They also, help with a number of, nutrient transmission and things like that. But neural cells are the important cells as far as we understand for brain processes. Nerve cells and their interactions through chemical messenger comprise the entire functions of the brain: thought, memory, consciousness, body control, movement, body regulation, pooping and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. It's all the brain. The brain poops. Yeah. So, in order to build a framework, we need to know how an individual nerve cell works. And this is where it's going to get a little bit complicated, so bear with me as we talk about an individual nerve cell, and then we can get to the interactions between these cells. So, when we think of the brain, if we think about the brain at all, there's this perception that there's some sort of electrical storm going on. We all imagine that. And in fact, I believe your graphic for our brain show had the brain and had like lightning bolts.
Yeah, there's an electrical storm right above it, yeah.
Sparks flying around.
It was a very exciting graphic.
Jumping gaps between cells, etc. This misunderstanding is built upon by various representations that we see in the media, like Josh's graphic, movies, media, etc. So
it was a damn fine graphic, though. It was very nice.
It was actually really nice. So go ahead and watch the intro to the movie Fight Club. They show the brain in the intro to the movie Fight Club. There's fucking sparks all over the place.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of electricity going on in there. I mean, that actually, I think, is a neurological disorder of some kind.
So here's what really happens, because that's not what really happens. A nerve cell, like all animal cells, has a cell membrane. This membrane is composed of fat cells. So being fat, the membrane doesn't conduct electricity. So our entire existence, the existence of every life form on Earth, is owed to this one stupid little protein that is stuck through the membrane, through the nerve cell. There is a protein that acts kind of like a door. That protein is called an active transport ion channel. And here's what it does. So, sodium chloride, salt, the evil substance that everyone says is so bad for you. What the active transport ion channel, that protein that's stuck through the membrane of the nerve cell, what it does is it takes salt and it separates it. Salt is composed of sodium, which is a positive ion, and chlorine, which is a negative ion. The ion transporters shuttle chlorine into the cell and leave the sodium on the outside. So if you know anything about batteries, electricity, or what would happen in that sort of situation, you take all the positive and you put it outside. You take all the negative and you put it inside. You create an electrical gradient. Outside is positively charged, inside is negatively charged. So the numbers aren't important, but just so we can get kind of a reference point on this. What happens is the inside of a nerve cell, gets a negative charge of negative 70 millivolts under most circumstances. So now that's fine. You got negative 70 on the inside. You have some random positive charge on the outside, and you have all this potential energy because those two things really want to come back together and neutralize the whole deal. But they stay separated because the nerve cell, the membrane is fat. It basically keeps the charge from going across one way to the other. So what happens is a chemical messenger comes along from a neuron, from an upstream neuron, and that chemical messenger does one thing. It says, open the doors. And the neuron complies. And when it does, the sodium that was outside comes pouring into the cell. And what that does is it takes the cell and it goes from it depolarizes it. So it has its internal charge was a negative 70 millivolts, as I mentioned. It actually spikes up to a positive 30 millivolts, which is not a huge difference, but it's enough of a difference for the cell to fucking freak out. What happens when the cell freaks out, when those floodgates open and the charge is neutralized, is the cell was actually storing up this chemical messenger. And the cell's response to the depolarization, that whole thing, is to spit out the chemical messenger into the synaptic gap, the distance between that neuron and the neuron downstream of it. It spits out chemical messenger. After it does so, the cell returns to the negative 70 charge, and everything goes back to normal, and it's actually stabilized by potassium, but I'm not going to get into that too much. So that's it. The stupid little protein that separates salt is the entire basis of our existence. Our thoughts, our memories, our movements, absolutely everything. We couldn't exist, we couldn't live, we couldn't exist at all without that stupid one little protein that's coded in our DNA. And that protein is present in all animal cells and in plant cells as well. So that's how a single neuron fires. Let's look at how neurons interact and actually form memories. So as far as we understand, memories are nothing more than groups of neurons which fire together in the same pattern each time that they are activated. So that whole thing with the sodium and the charge and then the spitting out the chemical messenger, doing so in a particular pattern is exactly what a memory is to our best understanding of that. So cell 1, let's say, receives a stimulus which causes it to fire, and in doing so it sets off a neighbor cell, cell number 2, which also fires. Now, nerve cells in the brain are actually different than any other cells in your body. When they fire, they are changed. They actually become more receptive to chemical messengers, more likely to fire. This is a property that, if it didn't exist, we actually couldn't form memories, but this individual nerve cell memory that exists actually allows us to form these groupings of memories. So they become more sensitive to being activated. So this starts off as temporary. And this increased sensitivity will actually go away if it's not triggered again. So this is a part of building a memory. This is why when you're trying to remember a phone number or vocabulary words or anything, you repeat them. You repeat them to yourself. You repeat as many times as you can. And what you're doing is you're having those individual nerve cells continue to fire, continue to stay in that hypersensitive state, so that eventually they can form a grouping between that cell, another cell, and a third nerve cell. And that right there is a memory. That is the sum total of a memory, whether it's 3 nerve cells at least, but 3 nerve cells or more, all firing in unison because they're all hypersensitive to a particular firing pattern, is our best understanding of how we actually encode memories. So that's it. That's memory. We're done.
All right. Now send your questions to reason@wnyatheist.net. You know, Paul, it seems to me that may be, on a microscopic scale, that may take care of it, but I'm not sure that actually answers the question as to what a memory is or what memory itself is.
Do you think I should keep talking?
I think maybe there may be just a hair or two more necessary here.
Okay. All right. Well, we know a little bit more than that. That's our basic understanding on a cellular level, but there's a little bit more going on. There's a little bit more that we are aware of. So these groupings of neurons that I mentioned form memories, but what we have discovered is that where these groupings of neurons are within the brain affect what kind of memory is formed. And there are a huge number of different kinds of memory, and you'll see what I mean when I kind of go into this. We're going to start off with the temporal lobe. This is your cortex, the lumpy looking outer surface of the brain.
The brainy part.
That we all think of as the brain. Yeah. Exactly. Groupings of neurons that are developed here wind up storing, as far as we can tell, long-term memories. How do we know that? Well, when they do brain surgery, the brain actually has the consistency of Jell-O. And when they do brain surgery, I am not making this up, they don't use a scalpel. They use, like, you know that sucky thing at the dentist's office?
Yep.
That's basically what they use. They use a vacuum cleaner. And when they sucked out parts of people's cortex, they forgot shit. They forgot shit that they knew since they were a kid. Like, it was just gone. So, do that a couple of thousand times and we develop an understanding that, oh, that's where your thinkerizer from the past stuff is.
That's where you keep all the stuff you know.
Yeah. So that's the temporal lobe. Now, that's just one area where memories are stored, and that's the particular kind of memory that's stored there. Stuff, the factual stuff. Your parents' phone number. Things like that. The address of the house you grew up in, the color of the house you grew up in, all kinds of things like that. But there's a little bit more going on. So there's also the putamen. The putamen.
I've heard it both ways.
Putamen is an organelle within the brain. It's way deep in the interior of the brain, and it is the storehouse for what are called procedural memories. This is shit that you have really no idea how you do, like riding a bike, playing a musical instrument, or anything like that. When you retrieve memories from here, they actually don't go up to your cortex. They don't make it into your consciousness. And so they go directly from the putamen through your basal ganglia down into your nerves, and they cause your muscles to do whatever your muscles need to do in order to accomplish whatever task you're asking yourself to do, like ride a bike or play a musical instrument. And go ahead and try and explain to someone how to ride a bike sometime. Not the physical, well, you get on it and you sit and you pedal and you go forward, but actually, how do you stay balanced? How do you turn? How do you turn is actually a good one, because if you think about it, you don't actually move the handlebars very much when you turn. There's a whole thing going on with you being aware of where your body is, leaning.
You reverse the direction, you turn the handlebars a little bit. It does a whole thing where you can turn very rapidly, but yet if you turn the handlebars too far, you just fall down.
Yeah. And that's all stuff that's in the putamen. It's all stuff that never actually enters our consciousness. It's just something that we are aware of, or not aware of, but we actually are able to accomplish. I can ride a bike, and you do it. So, and that's that whole phrase about, it's like riding a bike. Because it's in there, and
it just comes back to you because your brain, you're not thinking about it. You don't think you remember how to do it, but your body, as they say, knows how to do it because it's lower down. It's in your procedural memory.
Right. So moving on to the hippocampus. So this is even deeper into the interior of the brain. Strangely, it actually has a direct connection to the cerebral cortex that the putamen does not. So the hippocampus has two functions regarding memory. Spatial memory and navigation, like walking through your house in the dark, which, that if you walk through your house in the dark and you are aware of, where your coffee table is, where the kitchen table is, and blah, 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 that's all, information coming from the hippocampus. It's all kind of a base level functioning that you can walk through your house without slamming into stuff, unless somebody plays the funny joke of turning off the lights and then moving all your stuff around, which is great. So, the second function of the hippocampus is that it shuttles information to the cortex for long-term memory formation. So the hippocampus is the first area to develop damage in those afflicted with Alzheimer's we were mentioning before. If you think about this function, about taking short-term memories and shuttling them to the cortex for long-term storage or making them long-term memories, this actually makes sense when you think about the particular set of symptoms that develop with Alzheimer's. So that is one of the major functions of the hippocampus. So now we move down to the bane of everyone's existence, the necessary evil of our brain, the necessary evil which allows us to survive and exist in this world, the amygdala.
No, the amygdala is great.
Yeah, the amygdala is great.
It's a rocking good time.
The amygdala stores emotional memories, specifically traumatic emotional memories. Traumatic responses are stored here. The amygdala is the emotional center of the brain, and it's a motherfucker.
Yeah, that's where you get those flashbulb memories.
Every irrational fear, every emotional and traumatic memory that you have is stored in the amygdala as a grouping of neurons. So, every time, if you are in a car accident when you're younger and you freak out because you hear screeching tires behind you and still do so to this day, that's your amygdala kicking in.
Or a fear of bees, for instance.
Yes, a fear of bees. Whacked in the face with a purse. That's all I'm saying.
Yes.
Okay, so also the amygdala is also responsible for, shall we say, base behaviors. What I mean by that is fighting, fucking, drinking, drug use, eating, overeating, stuff like that. So recent research points to the fact that the amygdala may actually be the seat of sexual orientation. Maybe.
What actually seems like a reasonable spot to put it in.
Yeah, I mean, I guess.
I actually don't think that they, I was reading something on that recently. They don't seem to have a lot of proof. They just seem to think that would make sense.
Yeah, I think that's, why I put the addendum on there of maybe, because there's not really any solid evidence on there, but it's kind of best.
Where else would it be?
Yeah, that makes sense. But when people have difficulty with overeating, or people have difficulty with drug use, drug abuse, or drinking, alcoholism, things like that, one of the reasons why, at least, and again, there's no unitary cause here. There's many different reasons why someone would, be driven to drink or do drugs or overeat or anything like that. But once you do that, once you get the pleasure from sticking a needle in your arm and getting that shot of heroin, that pleasure, the memory is encoded as an emotional response. And that emotional response is stored in the amygdala. And so when you decide that you don't want to do heroin anymore, you know what? I think I'll stop doing heroin. It seems like a good idea. The problem is that your amygdala kicks in and it says, I really like the feeling of heroin. And tied to that is your entire emotional network, your entire emotional framework is all built upon heroin good. So that's the amygdala is actually responsible for all those addictive behaviors. Whether that's the addiction of drug abuse or the addiction of food. Simply eating.
Yeah, I mean, it's your more baser side. And so once you've explored the baser things, it's the part that says, please, more, please, sir, can I have some more?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So, but that's the amygdala. And, kind of next in line is the least kind of studied and the least understood area of this entire memory system within the brain, the caudate nucleus. Located behind the putamen, the caudate nucleus is responsible for instinctual memories, as far as we can understand.
Yeah, well, we're not really good at that anyway.
No, it seems to be responsible for our ability to learn languages, or at least keep them within our brains and recall them. Truth be told, again, the caudate nucleus is probably the least studied part of the memory system. We don't really know what's going on there. We do know that when babies are born, for example, there is an instinctual there's something built in which allows that baby to suckle, for example. That's something you don't have to teach a baby.
Yeah, it's one of the few instincts that they can actually say categorically humans do possess is the suckling instinct. After that, it gets very difficult to say what is instinct and what is learned.
Yeah.
But the propensity toward language, those are two things which are clearly instinctual to one degree or another.
Well, there's also some stuff like chewing, being able to use your tongue and teeth in order to masticate food and swallow it without choking or aspirating or anything like that. Those are kind of instinctual.
The problem is those kick in so late that it's very difficult for the testing to be done.
Yeah.
That the very, very small instinct, or the very, very small infants, there's very few things that they actually do, and we do learn and practice things. I mean, babies mouth words just looking at you. They just move their faces like they're trying to talk just because they're copying you. And so there's something to be said for the possibility of somewhat learning when it comes to chewing, masticating, eating, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But not as much with some of the more basic ones.
Right. So, but again, the caudate nucleus, more research labs out there need to be studying the caudate nucleus. It's a hard part of the brain to get to unless you have a cadaver and you're actually cutting into it and you can just remove everything around it. So studying it when it's actually functioning is a bit difficult. That kind of combined with our understanding that we think it may be responsible for these few instinctual behaviors and language, and that's about it, makes it it's difficult to get to, and it doesn't seem very interesting, I think, is the perception.
Well, the problem is how many things are actually entirely instinctual? Well, that's rough, because speaking English isn't entirely instinctual. But the desire and the urge to speak is. I mean, they find feral children that became feral before they learned to speak, and they talk. They talk in gibberish. So it's obvious that there's an instinctual element in speech.
Yeah.
But learning English is different, and the only way we can test people is people that know how to speak English. So when it comes down to it, there may be a great many things which are partially instinctual, yet not entirely. I mean, the bud is instinctual. The flower itself is learned, but the bud is instinctual, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. So, and someday we'll actually do an exploration of that. There's what are called gamma scalpels out there, which are going to, as we further develop that technology, are going to lead to breakthroughs in our understanding of these different internal organelles of the brain, which we've for so long have been unable to get to without simply cutting open someone's brain and sucking out all the top stuff, and then when we sew them back together, they can't answer any questions, so it's problematic. But those those areas of the brain are again these simple little groups of neurons that fire in these patterns, whether they're located in the amygdala, the hippocampus, the cortex. They wind up being the location of these firing patterns affect all these different aspects of memory. Whether it is the memory that we think of when we think of memories, which is, I remember my grandmother's house when I was 12 and I was there. That's fine. But there's also so many different aspects to memory, like, for example, riding a bike or playing a musical instrument, walking through your house in the dark, being afraid of whatever due to the amygdala, having an emotional response to whatever, having addictive behavior to whatever, or simple, muscle memory and control of our bodies. Knowing how to swim is a memory, and we don't think of it that way. We think of it as a skill or something like that. But
those are exactly what those are. Riding a bike is a skill, but all skills are memories.
Right.
They're things that are built into your mind, whether or not you're aware of exactly how you do it, which is very often why it's difficult to teach people skills unless you're a very trained teacher. Teaching skills is very difficult. You just make them do it and then show them how they're wrong.
Yeah, pretty
much. And then
much.
give them more and more practice.
But I think there is this, kind of assumption that we don't think of those things as memories necessarily, but they are. They're part of the encoding system of the brain. And, encoding, storage, and retrieval is much more than remembering, your phone number when you're a kid or your grandmother's house or whatever. There's so much more going on there. Mm-hmm. So, we're gonna move on to. That's basically how the memory system functions in a functioning brain. So there are, of course, a couple of things that can go wrong.
Yes, indeed. The non-functioning brains, where we actually learn the stuff that we learned.
Yeah. So that's our best understanding of the memory system. Coordinated groupings of neurons that store different information depending on where they are located within the brain. An incredibly efficient system. But it's not without its problems. It does have a couple of problems. Intelligent design folk notwithstanding. Mm-hmm. I know that they think that it's a perfectly designed machine, designed by the hand of God. Not God, no, not God. An intelligent being of some sort.
An intelligent creator, intelligent designer.
Yes, either inside or outside space and time or something or
both,
whatever.
Ish.
I think it has something to do with pandas. So, yeah. But before we get into what happened when physical parts of the brain break, let's talk about probably the greatest non-organic problem with the method that we've developed over time for information encoding, storage, and retrieval. It's at least the most studied problem, non-organic or non-physical problem with this method of information storage. False memories. The brain uses this information storage and retrieval method. It has a huge glaring problem. That problem is that the time period for when events occurred is stored as a dependent memory. Now, what I mean by that is when you have an experience, and it's of a sufficient threshold which makes a significant impact on you, and you decide that you're going to take that memory, or your brain decides that you're going to take that memory and put it into long-term storage and keep that with you for the rest of your life, or however long you have a functioning brain or whatever. The information about when that happened to you is actually stored within the memory, within that cluster of firing neurons. There's no external marker that says this happened when you were 12.
We don't have any kind of a clock that goes into our brain.
No.
I mean, it wouldn't serve an evolutionary purpose.
No, it really wouldn't. And that's ultimately why, nothing developed. There's no wristwatch in the brain keeping track of things. We just rely on the memories themselves to inform us as to when they occurred.
Or context. I mean, if you're remembering something because you're short, you remember observing something from that perspective, you remember it was from when you were young enough to be short.
Right.
So you remember it as part of it when I was 13 or when I was a kid. You store that as part of the memory.
Right. Why is that a problem? Well, psychologists at Washington University have been studying false memories and memory implantation for several decades. Mm-hmm. One famous experiment involves the retelling of 4 supposed childhood memories to volunteers. And what they did was they took volunteers and they basically told them stories of their lives. They told them 4 stories repeatedly, ad nauseum. Now, 3 of the memories that they told back to the subjects were true, and the 4th, which was specifically in this study, being lost in a shopping mall and eventually getting help from a stranger, that was not true at all. That actually never happened to the person. But they told it within, these 4 stories of when they were younger, and they just repeated the stories to the volunteers over and over again. And eventually, 1 in 4 of these volunteers recalled the memory as if it actually happened. So that happens because the information as to when the experience occurred is contained within the story, and it gets coded that way in your brain. So there's no external mechanism to say, I heard this story for the first time last week. Eventually, your brain just kind of shuttles it into long-term memory, and it just kind of nestles in there with every other memory that you had, and
becomes your memory from when you were a kid.
And when you go to recall that memory, the information contained within the memory is, I was 12. And there's no external thing that says, you just got this memory last week. Like that's gone as it goes to internal memory. So that's how, it was, I think back in the 70s and 80s is where the heyday of this whole, psychological, hidden memories thing was developed, where these psychologists and psychiatrists were subjecting patients to things like
memory regression therapy.
They were doing things like hypnosis and whatever. And with a lot of the patients that they had, they after a while, the patients would state that, I had this repressed memory. My parents were actually in a satanic cult. And I buried that deep within my psyche because I didn't want to remember it or know anything about it. My parents were Satanists, and they did all these rituals when I was a kid, and I remember being a part of it and having to drink blood or whatever. Just horrible stuff.
What gets me about those experiments is the reason that they degraded so quickly to Satanism is the people that were asking the questions. And this happened with police doing it as well, not just psychologists. Mm-hmm. They would ask you, and you would be so pleased when they gave you these horror stories, because kids just bullshit. Their line between real and fake is so vague. Mm-hmm. They would give these outlandish stories. People would believe them, give them all this positive reinforcement, that the kids would go over the story over and over and over and over until they believed it, and then they'd expound upon it. Make it more exciting. There's one case in California where a whole family that ran a daycare was and they were going to go to jail. Actually, I think the young boy, the teenager, did go to jail and eventually got out because the people, after a while, said, yeah, that didn't actually really happen. Yeah, and it took them a while to remember that.
And they wound up, in that particular instance, they wound up convincing, like, all of the children in the daycare center were on board with believing that these horrible atrocities were performed by the adults who were in charge of these children, and all of the adults were suspect. They were, again, at least one of them was arrested and put in jail for this, and it was all based upon memory implantation, these false memories. which have just a ton to do with not only what you're saying regarding children and their, flexible relationship with reality versus fantasy, but also it has a lot to do with pleasing the person who's trying to instill the memory. That is a huge part of it, and especially so with children, who, when you implant the memory into the child and then the child recalls the memory and you give the child praise for being able to break through that wall and actually remember the horrible things and no longer repress it, which is what they were doing. They were simply repressing it. And you praise the child for it. And that's positive reinforcement.
Positive reinforcement for that memory.
Yeah.
That memory is, I got it right.
Yep.
And you store that again as better information because you're praised for getting it right.
Right. And that's one instance. There's also another instance of a woman who eventually, through psychotherapy and hypnosis and regression therapy, was convinced that she had multiple personality disorder and actually had 142 different personalities. And none of that was true. Once they got her away from the therapist and got her into some more mainstream counseling and went through the whole process, all of that kind of faded away. And it was all just injected by this kind of regression therapy, which is, to my understanding, and I certainly hope so, has fallen out of vogue.
In the late 90s, it got a lot of bad press. A lot of bad press because they found out time and time and time again that it was just a load of crap.
Yeah.
And that, you have a lot of power when you have somebody in a very, very weakened position.
Yep.
You start getting them under hypnosis, you start playing with their heads, and they start, again, same with the children. They start getting this vague line between reality and fantasy, like in dreams. Mm-hmm. And then you reinforce that as true, or you reinforce that as good, and you're the authority, you're the therapist. There's a lot of power, and there's a lot of area for abuse.
Yeah. And all of that is the reason why things like that can occur with our brains, with our memories, and why our memories aren't necessarily the most reliable things in the world are because of the fact that we don't have a clock in our head. We don't have a wristwatch stuck around our brain. The entire context for the time period for when memories are, from when they are actually encoded, is built within the memory. So if you can inject a memory in total into somebody, then you're also injecting the time period for that memory, whether that be when you were 12 years old or a week ago or whatever. That is one of the major faults with the way that the brain stores information. One that we're certainly not going to be able to fix, but one that we should have a better understanding of, because not only are false memory implantations problematic like that, but this is also the exact same thing that leads to eyewitness accounts being an absolutely terrible, terrible mechanism for, whether it's a criminal case or anything like that. Completely unreliable. Eyewitness accounts.
If you've stored the memory that happened 3 weeks ago, it's stored as 3 weeks ago. That tag is on it.
Yep.
But then you can change that memory and not change the tag. So I can change the memory today or tomorrow or next week about the memory that happened 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I believe that's what happened 3 weeks ago, and I believe I remember it from 3 weeks ago. That's where the tag is from.
Yeah.
And it screws up witness testimony all over the place.
Yeah, and putting people in a lineup, if you have a vague memory of, you in a heightened state of fear, there was shooting going on, you were in a convenience store and somebody was robbing the place or whatever, you have a blurry kind of image in your head of the person who's robbing the place. Then you look at a lineup and you see some guy who maybe could fit the height and weight and maybe the face looks familiar or whatever. Well, you kind of, at that point, encode on your memory that the blurry image that you had now gets a face stuck on it. And now it's there.
With the same time tag.
Yep.
So it's not that I just learned that guy's face looks like this today. I knew from 3 weeks ago. Yeah. Even though I just put the tag for this face on today, because memory is incredibly plastic.
Yes, it is. So that's the problem with the time-dependent memory system that the brain uses. Now, we're going to close on a story of what can happen when your brain gets really fucked up. Okay? So there's a man, he's actually passed now. This is a good 60 years ago. He was in all the scientific literature. He was named only as HM. So a good 60 years ago, HM underwent a brain surgery in an attempt to resolve his severe epilepsy. Okay. The operation was absolutely brilliant, and by brilliant I mean barbaric. So they removed 2/3 of his hippocampus, and they removed his entire amygdala. This didn't work out so well.
No, I wouldn't think.
So he awoke from the operation having lost 2 years worth of memories. Okay. And he couldn't remember anything past the age of 25. He was 27 when he got the operation. Mm-hmm. So that in and of itself is not that uncommon, not so bad. This is, this does happen to people who have brain surgeries and things like that. They lose, years of their lives or whatever. It's a small price to pay if there's a tumor in your brain that's going to actually kill you in a week.
Right.
You might as well lose the 2 years and kind of live on. HM's greatest problem was that since they took out his amygdala, he couldn't actually shuttle any information from short-term memory to long-term memory. So think about that for a second. Consciousness is like a stream of perceptions, okay? Each moment is informed by the previous moment, and there is a linearity somewhat to our existence. For HM, every single moment had absolutely no context whatsoever. So every time he turned around, it was a completely new world, and he had no idea how he got there or anything like that. So we imagine HM's plight as being as simple as meeting someone and then not remembering them. But the truth of the matter is that every moment HM existed, he had no idea who he was, where he was, how he got there, why he's wearing the clothes he's wearing, any number of things that we all kind of take for granted. Oh, I put this shirt on in the morning. I know what's going on. I walked from this room to that room and so on. This was every moment was just a complete, kind of waking up from a coma and just being someplace every single second of every single day for this guy. So he was permanently stuck being a 25-year-old. They studied this guy into his 60s, and so one of the more horrible things that they did was they would hold up a mirror to his face, and he would freak out and lose his shit because a 60-year-old man was staring back at him, and he believed he was 25 years old.
Yeah, that's a rude awakening. Every time they show that mirror to you, I bet they scare the living crap out of you.
So, which is awful. The awfulness is somewhat mitigated by the fact that a second after they dropped the mirror, he forgot the whole thing. The fear went away, the whole panic went away, just gone. So, every single person HM met for the rest of his life was a stranger and would always be so. In the studies that were done, they discovered some interesting anomalies with this guy. One thing they discovered was that HM was, strangely enough, perpetually content. No depression, not even any reported sad feelings. He passed a ton of psychological battery tests developed to diagnose depression. He had no idea what was going on ever, but he was kind of okay with that. And that makes sense if you think back to the function of one of the functions of the amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain.
Right.
And especially specifically the traumatic emotional center of the brain. They took that out.
So he was content.
Yeah, he was like,
okay.
I don't remember anything, but you seem nice. That's pretty much about it. He was kind of okay with the whole thing. So, but this is actually one of the most interesting things about this guy to me. I just find this absolutely fascinating. They were able to teach HM how to play the piano. He didn't play the piano.
Yeah, procedural memory is totally different.
They taught him how to play the piano quite well, in fact. Again, it seems strange, but if you think back to the function of the putamen, which they left intact, it makes sense. This is where the procedural memory is encoded. It doesn't go up to the cortex. It doesn't have to be shuttled through the amygdala or anything like that. It just goes down and moves your fingers and you play the piano or ride the bike or whatever it is. So he learned how to play the piano over time, but he never remembered that he learned how to play the piano.
So he just sits down to piano every once in a while and just, holy crap, look at my hands.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's nice.
It must have freaked him out just to sit down and go, I can play piano. That's just insane. Just start playing. I have no idea. I think I'm playing a song. So yeah, I mean, that would be, now I'm certainly not willing to have my brain cut into and have my amygdala removed. Although since he was so content, it may not be that bad of a deal.
Let's say all your traumatic feelings and stuff, gone. You'd just be chilling. Just Matthew McConaughey all the time.
But the experience of just all of a sudden being put in front of a musical instrument and just playing it and going, hey, I can play. I mean, it reminds me of The Matrix.
I know Kung Fu.
Yeah, just injected that shit into the brain and all of a sudden they can start doing it. So HM is a good example of what can happen to the memory system when the brain breaks, or when we break the brain, or when we cut parts of it out, or whatever. Again, different sorts of memories are stored in all these different places in the brain, and it's never as simple as how it's portrayed in the movies. The movies love to just simplify this whole process, like the movie Memento, where he simply appears to not have a long-term memory, he only has a short-term memory, and probably not able. See, the problem is that the guy in the movie Memento is perfectly able to function in every other aspect of existence. He just doesn't remember anything. But
the problem is, by the time you finished reading the tattoos on your chest and looked back up at the mirror and went, oh, look, there I am. Yeah, it's gone again.
Yeah,
you wouldn't be able to follow the instructions.
You wouldn't be able to leave the house. You wouldn't be able to put your shoes on.
You'd be completely incompetent.
So, yeah. Again, movies love to simplify that. Memento's a great example. Another great example, I have to say, Muppets Take Manhattan. Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah, Kermit the Frog gets amnesia in that movie and then thinks he's a banker.
Really?
Yeah.
I guess I have no recollection of that movie.
He thinks he's a banker and they give him this fake handlebar mustache.
Well, like a banker has, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And he's wearing a suit. It's a good time. And when eventually he gets his memory back, I think he strips off all his clothes and becomes the naked frog that he is. Mm-hmm. Damn perverted Muppets.
Liberation. They're all nudists.
So again, the broken brain, it's never that simple. And if you're kind of interested in this stuff, one of the great books that you can read by Oliver Sacks is a book called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. That is a good time and a good example, that he goes through many examples of when certain parts of your brain break. How does your behavior, what manifests itself into your life? And then the title story, there's one guy who, his brain's broken, I believe he has brain surgery for a tumor, and he believes his wife is a hat. Now, what does that mean? There is no meaning to that. We don't have any sort of rational explanation.
Well, there's no way to explain it to somebody that isn't feeling it. I mean, it's absolutely absurd, except on the inside it feels right.
Yeah.
Like religious faith.
Exactly. So, yeah. So that is more or less what we know about the physical processes of memory coding, memory storage, and memory retrieval. We're making new discoveries all the time, but ultimately studying the brain is, like four blind guys feeling up an elephant. One of them grabs the tail, one of them grabs the trunk, one of them grabs a leg, one of them touches the side of the elephant or whatever. It's really kind of feeling in the dark.
Well, that's what everything is. The brain just turns out to be much more complicated than everything else. I mean, that's all medical science is. You do stuff until something happens. Well, that's most of what science is. It's just the brain turns out to be particularly complex.
Yeah, and not only particularly complex, but also one of the most difficult things about the brain, as I mentioned earlier, is it is just a big basket of goo up in our heads. I mean, your heart has valves. It has nerves that run through it. It has certain fibers called Purkinje fibers, and it has
easily identifiable parts.
Yeah, the brain doesn't have that so much. I mean, we've identified these sections. But
they're just sections. They're barely. I mean, they're crevices, creases, but that's about the best you can get for anything. Otherwise, it's just a general area.
It's a big collection of goo, and that's why it just seems so foreign to us, and is why it's so difficult to study the brain, to study memory or consciousness or any of that stuff. But so we may never be able to develop a framework to allow us to fully understand how the brain functions, how memory functions, how we think, how we perceive the world, and everything like that. We certainly may never be able to build a machine that functions on the level of complexity that the brain does. Maybe we will. Of course,
I'm confident we will.
When we do, they will enslave us. They will use us as a power source and put us in the matrix.
Well, sure. That seems like with a special kind of fusion.
Yes, with a special combined with a special kind of fusion. Yeah. So that being said, I think the future is going to be exciting. So that's the physiological processes of memory, encoding, storage, and retrieval as best we understand it. I mean, it's kind of a shot in the dark because it is, again, all these disparate pieces put together. But we do at least know, you have your cortex, which is your thinkerizer and is your long-term memory stuff. You have your putamen, which is muscle memory and your ability to perform tasks without thinking about them. Your amygdala is the emotional center. And, the hippocampus is responsible for shuttling information. It's responsible for, allowing you to function without input from your senses, which is, again, walking through your apartment in the dark and being able to manipulate your way around, spatial navigation, things like that. So that's what we got. Again, we're learning things all the time, and maybe one day we'll get there.
All right. So I hope that cleared up a few of the questions. I know myself, I'm perfectly understanding. I'm in possession of a perfect understanding of how memory works. So right now, I'm actually using my memory to remember what has occurred today. So I'm actually putting it into practical use already. Thank you, Paul.
Do you remember what that thing I said about memory? Remember that?
I don't really have any recollection of that. I'm sorry. I
sense.
I can't really recall that.
Well, I'll just repeat it ad nauseum until it, gets stuck in there and
Then
never
I'll believe that I knew it the whole time.
Right.
Okay, good deal.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on from there. We're going to do our next section, which is You're Wrong, and let me tell you why. Now, there's a little bit of a backstory to the topic for this
yes,
week.
There is.
There is, as some of you may be aware, and if you're not, oh my God, go there and check it out. It's a great time. There's a website called Conservapedia. It's basically Wikipedia.
For crazy right-wing nut jobs?
For the people we're not.
Yeah.
For the people, for the most part, I imagine our listeners are not. So, but Conservapedia has, very much like Wikipedia, it is pseudo open source. They require you to register, and I think they do a background check and things like that. But then eventually they allow you to post on there. And there's really interesting entries about Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, anybody on the
evolution.
left ever, evolution, intelligent design, creationism, age of the universe, age of the earth, things like that. So there are many, and there's also a section where they list a bunch of debate topics. And I was kind of having fun going through them today and found one that kind of struck my fancy as something that perhaps Josh and I should enter a discussion about. And that is the topic for today's You're Wrong and Let Me Tell You Why, which is, should all access to Conservapedia be banned on Sundays? Now,
well, they are religious right-wing nut jobs. They believe the earth is 6,000 or so years old. They believe in, keeping the Sabbath holy, doing that sort of thing. There's a lot of religious propaganda on there. It seems to me that that's a reasonable area for discussion.
Right. Okay. So I would say all access to Conservapedia should be banned on Sundays is the affirmative. I think it should be heads, and I'm saying you take the coin.
Okay. Here we go. And it's heads.
So you are arguing the position that all access to Conservapedia should be banned on Sundays. You have the affirmative, so why don't you start us off here?
Well, first off, as an organization or a grouping which presents this as not only right but true and an accurate representation of the universe, that is the case. I mean, there's not much of an argument there. They're saying that the religion, the Judeo-Christian Judeo-Christian belief structure is accurate, and it does say, thou shalt not work on the Sabbath. Now, work is pretty general. I mean, you and I have both taken a few physics classes. We know what work is.
Sure.
You should not work on Sunday or the Sabbath. So I don't think it's really a difficult question at all. Definitely should be.
Well, ultimately, I think the problem with what you're saying with your line of thinking here is you're assuming that Conservapedia is a religious organization that follows a particular doctrine or a particular theology, when in fact, Conservapedia is nothing more than a political website. They're presenting information from the perspective of a conservative, not from the perspective of a Christian, not from the perspective of the Judeo-Christian belief system. They're presenting it from a political perspective. So these different various religious beliefs many of which they espouse to, many of which they have entries on, have all these disparate ways of dealing with what is the Sabbath. For instance, the Jewish tradition has the Sabbath on Saturday, or from sundown on Friday through sundown on Saturday. So that is obviously not Sunday. So in order to not alienate those Jewish members who are also conservative and who enjoy using Conservapedia, I almost said Wikipedia, it would be unfair and improper of them to espouse this religious doctrine on top of what is essentially a political website and a political belief structure. So it's completely ridiculous to say that they should shut down access to Conservapedia on Sundays, when in fact many of the people who espouse to Conservapedia, many of their authors, many of their writers, don't actually hold true the Sabbath on Sunday.
Well, that seems perfectly reasonable, except many, if not most, of their posts that deal with religion deal with the Christian religion as opposed to the Jewish. It's not Judeo-Christian ideology they present. It is a Christian and a Protestant Christian ideology. So they are promoting, while along with their political agenda, they're promoting a religious agenda.
Okay, informing the public of the religious agenda isn't necessarily promoting it. For example, on our website, wnyatheist.org, we have a FAQ where we explain many of the tenets of various religions, many of the reasons why those beliefs are. It doesn't mean that we're substantiating that religion. It doesn't mean that we should shut down our website every Sunday in order to hold true to the beliefs when we're simply presenting the information, as is Conservapedia. They are simply presenting the information so that the reader can use that information to whatever means they feel is appropriate.
Well, after reading quite a few of the articles there, I'd have to say, no, that's not correct. They present some perspectives as correct and other perspectives as incorrect. Much like Wikipedia has a pseudoscience section where they present certain things as incorrect, and they present other things as correct or accurate.
So you're saying
Conservapedia does the same thing. They present the Christian and the Protestant Christian ideology as correct, as accurate, as factually accurate. Therefore, they are contradicting that by not restricting Sabbath use.
You know, I'm starting to think that you are holding the completely misinformed belief that Conservapedia is somehow biased or slanted towards a religio-political perspective or something like that. No, they're simply a storehouse of information, much like Wikipedia. They are simply presenting the information to the reader. I think it's unfair of you to say that they are following any sort of religious dogma or doctrine when in fact they are nothing but a storehouse of information.
I would agree, but the problem is that their perspective is not as to what is dogma or isn't. When they present things as true or factual, they're presenting the Protestant belief structure as true and factual. Therefore, their idea of presenting fact is inadvertently, perhaps, presenting ideology. So they're stuck in a situation where they do present ideology because of the belief that it is correct. And I wouldn't suggest that they present things they believe to be incorrect. That would be unreasonable. But in doing so, they are presenting, again, even if inadvertently, in a Protestant ideology, a Protestant perspective, which they're declaring is true and factual. Now, whether they have evidence to support this or not, I'm not going to say, but I am saying that if I declare that dogs are mammals, if there is a religious belief that could be found in that, I am now espousing that religious belief. I'm declaring it as fact. And when they present that the Protestant faith is true and accurate, they're presenting it as factual. Therefore, in believing that, they would have to fall into the category of Protestant, or at least falling under the Protestant ideologies. So they would have to then be stuck in that situation where they would be obligated to avoid hypocrisy. They would be obligated to shut down on Sundays.
I think that's absurd. I think you're basically espousing that they're clouding their presentation of information through this lens of these beliefs that they hold in particular religious practices, which I don't think they do. Again, I think they're simply presenting the information. I think it's unfair of you to say that they're anything more than a political website. To say that they have some sort of religious bias doesn't actually account or include the fact that they have entries for Hinduism, they have entries for Islam, they have entries for all these religions, and they present them as they present all the information in a fair and balanced mechanism. Yeah, so basically, Conservapedia is, again, just like Wikipedia, just like any of the number of information sources out there throughout the internet, simply trying to present what they perceive as the proper information with which to inform their audience.
Yes, the proper information being information from a Protestant perspective. And they're not being ideological about it necessarily. They're simply presenting what they believe to be true and accurate, which falls into the camp of the Protestant faith. So to not do that would make them hypocritical. So they really have to, if they do believe, as many of their, and I've read quite a few of their religious presentations, and I've read their Muslim, I've read their Hindu, I've read their Jewish, I've read many of the Protestant ones, I've read the the evolutionist ones. I've read a great many of their entries, and their entries are slanted into Protestant perspective, as they should be. If this is something that they believe not necessarily to be simply religious, but to be true and factual, they would have to. And to avoid hypocrisy, they would have to then keep the Sabbath holy and not work on the Sabbath.
Well, you present as if they are saying that they have this Protestant slanted leaning towards Protestantism or whatever. Have you considered the fact that perhaps they're not slanted towards Protestantism? Perhaps it's your own biases that slant you away from Protestantism that make it so that you cannot perceive the true facts that are presented there, which again, that doesn't have anything to do with their fair and balanced presentation of the information, but simply your own biases and narrow-mindedness and closed-mindedness regarding any sort of religious information being presented. You, sir, are in fact a hater. You hate religion, you hate God, you're a Satanist, and you put babies on spikes. And that is clear from all of your presentation here, saying that that's why Conservapedia should shut down on Sundays. And it should shut down on Sundays according to you because you hate babies. Admit it.
No, I'm sorry. It sounds like your own biases and tainted perspective has washed into it. Has it occurred to you that perhaps the Protestant faith is correct and that their presentation is fair and balanced and honest and only seems slanted toward Protestantism because of your perspective and your belief that I have to be interpreting this in a specific way is masked by shaped by your lack of belief that they are in fact correct, that they're not biased. They're actually looking at reality through a different lens than you, but actually a more accurate and a clearer lens, so that all their seemingly propaganda-ish presentations are actually simply correct. That Christ did rise after the third day, that evolution is a scientific conspiracy, that all of these things are actually true and accurate, and that the Sabbath is in fact holy and should be kept work-free and full of rest, as did our Lord on the seventh day of creation.
All right, that's all well and good. Let's get down to the real issue here. The real issue is clearly, okay, we'll operate upon your assumption that they're simply espousing Protestantism as being the correct path to follow, and one should follow it, and all the information presented there is simply for the benefit of readers to be better Protestants.
No, to be better people, Protestantism being correct. I'm not saying that people should be better scientists, or however you say a person who practices the religion of science. I'm not saying that people should be, but science itself believes their answers are accurate in the abstract, objectively true. And if the same could be said for Conservapedia, that their answers are objectively true, that there is in fact no bias there, I have to say that they would be hypocritical to not be shut down on Sundays.
Well, that's fine. I will grant you that premise, but ultimately, not keeping holy the Sabbath is but one of a myriad of commandments that Conservapedia, by virtue of its very existence, is not following. So when you consider that they are not 100% adhering to biblical information or the tenets of the Protestant faith or whatever, it's probably worth the violation of the Sabbath when you consider that somebody who may not be informed as to Protestantism or its correct and logical path may decide on a Sunday to check out Conservapedia. That person would miss that opportunity if Conservapedia shut down on a Sunday. And I think ultimately that is the reason why it would be foolish of a website like Conservapedia to shut down on the Sabbath, even though their religious and philosophical beliefs and doctrine say that they should. Their religious and philosophical beliefs say that they should do a number of things which they don't do. What's one more when you could save a soul from eternal damnation? I'm just saying.
How many others are part of the Big Ten? Because they're 10 commandments, the Big Ten, as I like to call them, and I can't think of another single one that Conservapedia is violating.
You don't think they eat food?
I think they eat food.
Isn't that killing?
No, it's not. Killing implies 2 equals meeting, so you can only really kill a human. You can take the life of an animal, but that's hunting. That's not killing per se. So there are differences. I mean, you can't help but kill things. I'm killing things right now by sitting here, but they're itsy-bitsy, teeny-tiny things which live in my gut or live in my body that I'm killing, and that's sad. That's clearly not the intention of the command from our Lord and Savior, Yahweh Elohim, Jesus Christ Allah, or something. That's clearly not the
great
intention.
Spaceship.
Yes, that's clearly not the intention there. The intention there is people. So I have to say, they're not violating any other of the Big Ten. Therefore, this one should not be violated either. There's a reason there were 10 commandments. Those are 10 important things.
Well, I think Buddhists would definitely disagree with you.
The Buddhists would. Come on.
All right. Well, if you think that Conservapedia should be shut down on Sundays or every other day of the week, if you go check it out, you may think that. We want to know what you think. So, also, if you think that Josh is espousing that hunting is not killing, any comments on that whatsoever, or anything we talked about, give us an email. Our email is reason@wnyatheist.org. We'd like to hear what you have to say about that. So we're kind of wrapping up here. I have to say, should Conservapedia shut down on Sundays? Honestly, I don't give a shit.
Well, that's understandable.
I don't care. I would be disappointed if it were a Sunday and I felt like entertaining myself and I was not able to because Conservapedia was shut down.
Well, the other side of that is, what about people that get home from church and have an honest-to-goodness question, and the storehouse of conservative ideas that they have access to, Conservapedia, wasn't available?
Yeah.
So truthfully, I guess you could just turn the computers on like the Hasidic Jews do, or the very, very, very devout Jews do, where they put a pot of food on and just eat from it, and it's heating all day. That way they're not technically cooking.
Oh man, the shortcuts and the loopholes that they use to get around that shit.
Conservapedia can just turn itself on and then not be, changeable or anything, and not actually do anything. Then nobody touches the computers for that day. That's also an option. To avoid hypocrisy.
Yeah. Well, then perhaps they should do that then. So, all right. Well, we're kind of wrapping up here. We're actually a rather lengthy episode today. We had a fair amount to talk about regarding memory. So, if you have any questions about anything we talked about today, whether it's the freshman Congress and their diversity, what's going on in Montana, anything about memory or atheism or Conservapedia for that matter, go ahead and send us an email. It's reason@wnyatheist.org. Also, check out our website, which is wnyatheist.org, and our blog, The Offensive Atheist. You can find a link there. And, we look forward to hearing from all of you as we move into this next year and we kind of develop further all the stuff that we're doing. We're kind of working hard, bringing some new things, and there'll be some things in the future which we will be able to share with all of you. But for now, let's just say that next week's topic is going to be on cults. Cults. Which should be a scary good time. And, we're going to have some fun with that. So until next week, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sayonara.